It's not to say you need to become vegetarian. This is not a campaign for veganism or vegetarianism in any way.
Greetings, Earthlings, and welcome back to Earthlings 2.0, the show where we imagine how we can be better versions of ourselves and build a collective future we actually want to live in. This week is special for a few reasons. The ones I'm going to share are it's my birthday week, and it's also a week where we celebrate Eat Your Beans Day. So this week we are featuring our episode with Andy Jarvis of the Bezos Earth Fund about the magic of beans. Because, when you're thinking about all the problems in the world, the health and diet issues we face, nutritional issues we face around the world, the challenges around agriculture and soil degradation, nitrogen, fertilizers, the runoff, and then there's climate change on top of it. It can all feel really overwhelming. Like, how are we going to solve all of these issues? And Andy would say, beans is how. But before we dive into the world of legumes, I'm your host, Lisa Ann Pinkerton. I'm the CEO of the award-winning PR firm Technica Communications and founder of Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability. Before building those organizations, I was an award-winning environmental science reporter for NPR and PBS. And to any of you new listeners, welcome aboard. We're very happy to have you on our proverbial spaceship to journey through the cosmos and focus on this lovely blue-green space flower that we call home. We cover a lot of stuff here, from mushrooms and lab-grown meat to electric vehicles and carbon markets and sustainable foods. And for those of you returning listeners, thank you too for joining us each week. It is a joy to have you here, and we really appreciate you spending time with us. For those of you that would like to contribute to the podcast's success and give back, please share your favorite episodes with a friend. Just send it over in text when you guys are talking next about podcasts. That's going to help us spread the word, and we really appreciate your support. If you've done all those things, you can join the Substack newsletter, and you can go to Patreon and become a member, and you can also take our listener survey. Those are some other things that you can do. So thank you for supporting us while we support you. And thank you to Resource Labs for having us on the network. Beans are a magical food. It's not just a silly kids rhyme. They are rich in protein, fiber, B vitamins, calcium, potassium, and zinc. They are also similar to meat in terms of nutrients, but have no saturated fats. And nutritionists will recommend we eat about 3 cups of beans a week, or 375 grams for those of you who are non-US listeners. And I know there's a lot of you. Thank you for joining us. Beyond reducing heart disease and improving overall earthling health, doubling bean consumption by 2028 could have a substantial positive impact on the environment. For example, legume crops capture nitrogen in the soil, creating climate-resistant agriculture and improving overall soil health for a multitude of plants. That's why the Bezos Earth Fund's Andy Jarvis joined the SDG2 Bean Science and Innovation Advisory Council. That's the brain trust behind SDG2's Beans is How initiative. That's an advocacy hub that coordinates global campaigning and advocacy to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 2, that's the SDG. And its goal is to end hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture by 2030. Andy is the director of the Future of Food at the Bezos Earth Fund. He has over 20 years of experience in research and development to support the delivery of food security and environmental sustainability in the food system, and we caught up with him from his home in Colombia.
Basically, beans is how is the answer to life, the universe, and everything else. I just think it's a very elegant...
It's not 42.
It's not 42. Beans is how, right? And It's a very elegant way of answering difficult questions that we get. So as consumers, everyone on the planet is a consumer of food, and you get the question, the consumers are asking, what should I eat to be good for the planet, for myself, for my health, for farmers themselves and so on. And it's a difficult question. And most of the time, people are very good at saying what you shouldn't do. And that's not great for influencing consumer behavior and inspiring people. And so beans is how is actually the what you should do. It's the answer to so many of the questions. How can I solve the climate crisis with what I eat? Beans is how. How can I access much better nutrition? Beans is how can we fix the soil and consume less water with what we eat? Beans is how. And so that's really, I just think it's a very simple message, very powerful.
Hmm. Okay, great. How much bean consumption do we have currently now globally? I'm sure it varies by region and culture and cuisine. So what is the baseline that we're looking at today?
One of the reasons why beans is very important is that it's actually everywhere. One way or another, people eat beans, and we kind of look at beans as it's really pulses. So it's beans, lentils, chickpeas, all of these kind of pulses. So we look at it kind of more broadly. The bottom line with it is consumed everywhere, but yes, it's very different. The global average is 21 grams per person per day, right? It's hard to kind of put that into perspective, but it varies a lot. Africa is the real front runner in this. There it's 34 grams, so they're almost eating double what the global average is. Somewhere like in East Asia, it's 1 gram per day per capita per person. But to put it into perspective, right, in Europe, it's 4 grams, which is very little, right?
Hmm. And so 21 grams, I did some quick calculations while you were talking. It seems to be like an eighth of a cup for the Americans out there. And that would just be what we're eating now on average. But as you say, in certain regions of the world, it's going to be significantly less. And I'm curious to know, if we want to increase the bean consumption, where should we be putting our focus on in the future? Are there certain regions of the country we want to focus on? Are you thinking globally, broadly? What's your take here?
So, and just to give you the stat on North America, so North America consumes 11 grams right now. So that's half of what the global average is. So North America is kind of below where it should be. So, I mean, what we want to achieve with this is global impact. We want to double bean consumption globally. And that needs to happen in every country, in every region. And everyone you mentioned culture. Culture is really important. I'm British, right? The Brits, we eat baked beans for breakfast, right? That's actually where we get our bean intake, is with those, baked beans, and then with all sorts of other things like bacon, which are not the answer to everything necessarily. But we have in Africa, for example, it's beans for lunch and dinner cooked from dry beans, and it's very different everywhere you go, right? And so we need a global doubling.
And I can see how encouraging more bean consumption, especially in more developed countries, you could kind of butt up against sort of eating meat as your primary source of protein, can seem, as if you're have a certain stature economically. So how do you think we can overcome this in the developed countries?
No, absolutely. I mean, and this is the challenge. It's stagnated. The consumption has stagnated, and it's going down actually in many regions, especially in developed countries. So one of the problems is accessibility and ease. We've moved into convenience in terms of what we eat. Cooking beans is not as easy as just warming something up in the microwave or frying an egg or whatever. There's a convenience factor in this, but then there's also this kind of cultural thing that is pretty universal. That as you have money, you buy meat, and you get your protein instead of coming from pulses. You get your protein coming from meat, and it's kind of seen as it's associated with wealth. So that's really what we need to break, is that mentality that I have money, I have disposable income, I can buy a bigger steak and eat less beans and get all my protein now from meat. And that's not just in developed countries. That's also a very strong cultural phenomena in Africa as well.
So what would you say to someone who didn't even consider beans as a part of their protein intake? How would you reframe that for them?
It depends what you're interested in, right? If you're looking at climate, for example, for 1 gram of protein, it takes 250 times more emissions to get that from meat, red meat, than it does from beans. So you can get your protein with 1/250th of the climate emissions if you consume a bean instead, right? That's if you're on the sustainability side of things. If you're looking at if you're concerned about health and nutrition, there's 0 cholesterol, there's 0 fat, there's plenty of fiber, there's plenty of protein, and there's also all sorts of micronutrient stuff, right? In Africa, there was a study by Cornell that showed that young girls and adolescents who were eating beans, and particularly eating biofortified beans that had a bit more zinc and iron in them, were basically smarter. Their cognitive capacities went up. So by eating beans, you're not only kind of just being healthy in terms of your body getting the nutrients and things, but you're feeding your brain, you're feeding your cognitive capacity, and that I think is incredibly powerful.
If you think about how humans have evolved on this planet over the eons, we were hunter gatherers and foragers before we were before the agricultural developments. So we were. And so beans and nuts and other types of nutrients that we could find out foraging is what our bodies evolved on before we started raising animals for protein. And so it would make sense to me that the body would be better attuned to gaining its nutrients and leveraging those nutrients from beans versus meat.
Our bodies are basically adapted from thousands of years ago. And, meat was there, an absolute luxury, the kind of thing that every now and again you'd be able to catch and eat. But the vast majority of our, as you rightly pointed out, came from hunter-gatherer and from gathering, foraging beans and cereals and so on and so forth. And so this is much more bioavailable for our bodies. It's much easier for our bodies to extract the nutrients that we need. But the other thing is we have a health crisis from what we're eating, and so many of the excess amounts of calories and cereals and carbohydrates and fats that we're getting from other things is really, it's creating not just global obesity, but diabetes, you name it, heart disease. All of this is because of what we're eating, and our bodies are simply not evolved to eat what we're currently eating in our diets. And so, again, let's keep on the positive, though. How do you change that? Well, beans is how.
Yeah, so this is fascinating to me because your website, it talks about how you want to double bean consumption globally by 2028, which isn't that far away. So how did you pick that number to double the bean consumption as your goal, and how did you pick that date?
Those are great questions. It's a lot easier to say double than, multiply by 1.83. So double's a nice round number. We think it's achievable. It's not a massive amount of increasing consumption. You're starting on a low baseline. Doubling should be easy. So that's the first thing. But also, it's just very, it's an untapped kind of area of work. You have consumers who are increasingly worried about what they're eating, be it for health benefits, be it for the planet. And they are asking, what can we do to eat better? And we think it's highly achievable to doubling this. And if we do it by 2028, we have the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. The amazing thing with the numbers of this is if you do double bean consumption, and that displaces some more harmful things that we are eating for our source of protein, for example, you're having planetary level impacts. We are drastically reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We are reducing the footprint of agriculture on the planet. we're reducing heart disease on a global scale. And so it sounds small, but it has enormous impacts if we do achieve that doubling. And we'll do it before 2030 when these SDGs are set for.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, we've talked a little bit about climate change, and in some of our previous episodes, we've explored how food yields, agricultural yields are expected to be lower as the planet continues to warm. Have you done any research into how beans might be affected with the rising temperatures of the planet? Are they going to be more resilient, or would they also have lower yields of growth?
I mean, like basically all agriculture is going to suffer from climate change. It's farmers and their crops and their animals that are out there on the front line, really feeling the first impacts of climate change. And you ask any farmer, they complain about the climate, that it's crazy, that it's unpredictable, that it's too hot, that they've suffered from droughts, floods, you name it. So like all crops, basically beans will be impacted. There's a lot of effort to do, for example, drought-tolerant beans are getting developed, heat-tolerant beans are getting developed, just like for all crops. So yes, the impacts will be there. But beans does some things that will actually build up resilience for farms as well. And so beans and pulses they're legume crops. Legume crops are capturing nitrogen and putting it into the soil. And so you're actually increasing soil health through production of beans. You're using less fertilizers, they need less fertilizers, which makes it a productive system that is much more sustainable. But also, they're very kind and remediate and improve soil health. And when you have a healthy soil, you're also more resilient to climate impacts.
Okay, so if we want to double bean consumption by 2028, and in certain regions around the world, we're eating very little beans. How are we going to encourage people to eat more beans? Frankly, I don't want to sound like a generalist, but it seems like every generation cooks less than the generation before, or understands or feels more confident cooking. How can we overcome some of these social challenges? Like, what are you doing with your campaign to encourage more bean consumption?
Yeah, so we're really kind of doubling down on multiple fronts. We've developed this theory of change for the Beans is How campaign. Kind of outlines how are we going to double this by 2028. One is looking directly on consumers, and it's a changing consumer behavior, and we can do that on multiple fronts. One is looking at celebrity chefs. Second is restaurants. Every restaurant from McDonald's up to the Michelin star restaurants. You can have bean forward menus where beans are on the menu first of all, but they're also higher up on the menu. The third is retail, right? So for consumers, make beans more visible. It's very subliminal, but what happens in supermarkets, the positioning of products is absolutely critical for defining what you buy. And so we need to be thinking novel about how retail can be going bean forward, putting beans much more visible in the places where people are likely to find it. I mean, the real challenge here is getting the next generation, changing this kind of perceptive of moving away from beans as you have more disposable income into beans being the sexiest dish you can serve up your friends when you try to impress them, right? On the first date, get the beans in there and you're away, right? But so, there it's also working with youth, and that starts in schools. And so looking at getting beans regularly into school feeding, right? So that's on the consumer side, but there's all sorts of policy stuff that can be done as well from the private sector and from governments as well. So we're looking, you've got the procurement issue, procuring more beans, getting those on school feeding and into diets there. Subsidies, and that is a major issue. It's very political, very controversial, but that's the role of government. They should be forward leaning on the things that are good for society. So that's one. And the other is supply chain. So, a lot of things we've got a food system that has evolved into a situation where we rely on far too few products.
So if we're thinking into the future, 2028, it's about 5 years away that we want to double bean consumption. How can we break it down for folks? Should they think about having, like how many bean forward dishes might you want to have a week? Or how would you want to integrate beans into your current dishes? Like what's a benchmark for people?
That's a great question, and it very much depends on where you are and kind of current patterns. But if you are putting beans, having a bean recipe, eating beans as a, not just as a kind of a few beans scattered on something, but actual, a bean dish where bean is a bit of a headline feature on it. If you're doing that twice a week, we're winning. That's a great benchmark. Just do it twice a week with that, and any more, even better, right? I mean, you can have beans in salads. You can have beans as casseroles and stews. You can have beans in your burritos. You can have it. It can come in so many forms, and just integrate it in. And so, yes, one thing is doubling beans, which is great, but it will really have major outcomes on your health and on the planet if that's displacing consumption, especially of red meat. In the US, for example, consumption of red meat right now is second in the world, 37 kilos per capita per year. That's a huge amount. It's doing you harm. It's not good for your heart. And so, we should be looking at doubling bean consumption and displacing the more harmful stuff in our diets. It's not to say you need to become vegetarian. This is not a campaign for veganism or vegetarianism in any way. It's just rebalancing our diets that is going to be good for people and planet.
And beans can be absolutely delicious. I think people think that if they're going to eat beans, it's just a pile of beans, unsalted, no flavoring, and it just kind of turns to mush. But there are recipes out there that can really elevate the flavors of some of these different beans and like you say, make them the star of the plate. And you have some recipes on your website that people can access as well. Tell us about those.
Yeah, I mean, what we've developed some kind of bean forward recipes that we're promoting there on the website. But more than that, I mean, what you have is there's the hashtag beans is how. If you look on Instagram, Twitter, you name it, all of the social networks, TikTok, there with that hashtag, you'll see chefs doing delicious dishes, right? As I say, as you say, beans can be a very strong headline in a dish, and done right, it's full of flavor, it's fantastic. And not just beans, lentils. I've spent, I must admit, I'm kind of up to here with it now, but I made a massive amount of lentil dal over the weekend, and I've been eating it basically all week. But absolutely delicious, and you can do a big batch and just keep it in your fridge, and through the week eat little bits, put it as a side plate, and things like that. So as I say, it can be very versatile. Yeah. And you're eating beans. Yeah, you're eating this when you're eating, hummus. You're having, hummus with a dip and some vegetables. That's beans and pulses that you're eating there. So it can come in all these different formats. We have a chef here that we work with, who's fantastic, a guy called Luigi, and he's created actually a bean ice cream, which was delicious, and also has made bean bread, so cakes and biscuits and bread from bean flour. So it even extends to there. Bakeries, watch out, get your beans in there.
Earthlings, do you feel more inspired to eat beans now that you've heard from Andy? I know I was. And before you get too overwhelmed, because I know that's how I felt, I was like, oh my God, now I got to learn how to cook all these beans and new recipes. And before you freak out, calm down. We're going to put some recipes in the show notes from the Beans is How initiative, and you can start there. And listen, it's all about baby steps, right? We don't have to change your diet completely. Just start substituting some of the meat consumption for bean consumption. and see what happens, see what you like. And if you happen to feel inspired enough to make a bean recipe and put it on social media, be sure to tag the Beans is How initiative with the hashtag Beans on the Menu, and also the Earthlings podcast at Earthlings Pod. We would love to see what you're making. Speaking of being bean forward, Shirley Bellows restores our faith in humanity this week. She's a Canadian master gardener who may have single-handedly saved the blue jay bean from extinction. She noticed that the blue jay bean was being discontinued from the heirloom seed company that she was accustomed to getting it for her supply. And she asked around, and a lot of other people didn't actually have many of them. In fact, she thought she might have had, the last biggest stash of seeds for the blue jay bean. So Shirley refused to allow her beloved blue jay bean to become a has-been. So she started making sure that people started growing it and sharing it with as many people as they could. Today, the blue jay bean is sold by about a dozen seed companies in Canada, and her seed saver efforts are being carried out by many unsung green thumbs, quietly stocking their heirloom seeds for the future. We hope that you'll take inspiration from Shirley's story and imagine how you could do one simple thing that you feel passionate about and change the world for this future that we are all collectively attempting to create, and make our beautiful blue-green space flower we call home more lovely and enduring.